For those of you who play top lane, you might have noticed a bit of a shift in the meta during this preseason. With the removal of true damage from Conqueror paired with the buffs for tanks on Aftershock, tanks have been a lot more popular lately. Now this is something that personally I am 100% okay with. In my opinion, a tank meta is the healthiest meta that can exist in League of Legends. It promotes slow play, which means you need to be playing better for longer. Carries will also always have the outplay potential on tanks so long as their tuning is decent. Since we are slipping into a tank meta, today we're going to be going over some of the tanks that you should be abusing for free ELO and some of the tank killers that are going to be really good in response. Pretty much all of this stuff is going to be top lane simply because the other roles aren't as popular for tank picks to exist in. Now, if you're a player that typically doesn't like tanks, then I would highly recommend that you at least try them out during this preseason. Remember, the preseason is the best time for improvement and trying new picks out. If your number one goal is improving during the preseason, then I would highly recommend checking out our website, GameLeap.com. There we have hundreds of guides, all done by challenger players, sorted into a quick and easy to use courses system. We have courses both on the 5 fundamental roles as well as champion specific courses, so if that is something that interests you, then make sure to check us out using the link in the description below. Now, what are some of these tank picks that are so strong at the moment? Well, it's going to be a mixture of both Grasp and Aftershock tanks. Grasp tanks are going to be stronger in the laning phase, whereas Aftershock tanks are going to scale a lot better and they're going to team fight better in the late game. Let's talk about the lane dominant Grasp of the Undying tanks first. This is going to be picks like Sion, Maokai, and Cho'Gath. Typically, these picks are a lot stronger into bruisers that have an aggressive early game. Your main goal on each one of these champions is to stay on top of the wave and keep your Grasp fully stacked for as long as possible. If you're able to do this, then anytime the enemy champion comes up to trade with you, you're going to get a free stack of Grasp, which will do additional damage to the enemy as well as heal you. Now, why are we going Grasp on these champions instead of Aftershock? After all, Maokai, Cho, and Sion can all take Aftershock viably without really losing too much. The first reason is they have some way to keep themselves topped off. For Maokai and Cho'Gath, the reason is the sustain that their passives give them. These passives also make both Cho'Gath and Maokai really strong picks into ranged top laners, especially right now. You can easily farm out the laning phase and then be more useful to your team in the late game, being able to be a huge frontliner that's going to be very hard to deal with. For Sion, the reason he's so strong in the laning phase is because he's able to mitigate so much trade damage with his shield. Sion is also really powerful in the laning phase against other melees, because anytime that melee wants to come up and grab a CS, you're able to charge your Q and hit the enemy with it. By maxing Q first on Sion, you're able to do an insane amount of damage while still building full tank and taking none. This is what makes Sion probably the best tank to play into other melees, at least for the laning phase. Since we just covered the tanks that are really strong into early aggression, let's talk about some picks that are good into these type of Grasp top lane tanks. First up, of course, we have to talk about Fiora. Fiora is the ultimate pick into these types of tanks simply because they don't do a lot of burst damage, she's able to parry their CC, and she does a lot of true damage, meaning she doesn't care how much armor they build. If you're not able to get Fiora, then Camille is also another really good pick. She also has sustain with her W, she's got some percent max HP, she's got some true damage, attack speed buffs. All of her kit is really good against tanks. She can also choose to trade on her passive's cooldown and pretty much prevent herself from taking any sort of meaningful damage. Now, Camille won't be as good as Fiora when late game comes around, especially into tanks like Sion and Cho'Gath who just stack an insane amount of HP, but she still will be really good and she's never going to die to them. Finally, let's talk about one of the ranged carries that is really good into tanks, this one being Vayne. Vayne is going to be strong into picks like Scion and Cho'Gath because she has % max HP true damage. Now, I would not recommend picking Vayne into Maokai because Maokai is actually a very good pick into Vayne. His passive is going to keep him topped off, he's able to dodge Vayne's Condemn with his W, and he's got a huge amount of lockdown potential. On top of this, a lot of the tankiness that he has comes from the sustain from his passive, not from raw HP or armor, meaning the % max HP true damage that Vayne has won't be as effective on him. If you are playing against the Maokai, Fiora and Camille are definitely your pick. Don't go for Vayne here. So we've covered our grasp tanks, some counters to tanks. Next up, we've got to talk about our Aftershock tanks. Our number one Aftershock tank is going to be Ornn. You can take Grasp on Ornn, but usually you want to take Aftershock simply because he has such good armor and magic resist ratios, which is going to scale the Aftershock even more, and on top of that, he doesn't really need the sustain. Aftershock also works really well with his bursty kit. The damage portion of Aftershock adds that teeny amount of damage that you do need on Ornn in order to 100 to 0 targets. If you're able to get your W proc off into a double ultimate on top of another W plus Aftershock and Q, you're going to be killing a target. With Grasp, this is just a little bit harder to do. Other Aftershock tanks are stuff like Nautilus or Singed. This is stuff that's going to definitely be diving into the enemy team and has no way to get out and no good way to soak damage aside from Aftershock. Picks like these were designed to teamfight, so you take Aftershock on them so that you're able to do that because that is the most important thing for them. It's okay if you sacrifice a bit of your laning phase in order to have that dominance in late game teamfights. You're going to want to pick an Aftershock tank for your team if it looks like you're going to teamfight a lot or if you already have a good wombo team comp. Aftershock tanks are also really good at delaying any specific ADC, so long as they're not Vayne, from killing your front line. If you are picking an Aftershock tank, remember it is not for your lane phase, it is for your team and your team fighting potential. Your only goal on an Aftershock tank is to farm out the laning phase, and that's it. You're not picking an Aftershock tank in order to counterpick your laner. If that's what you're doing, you're completely missing the point here. There are tanks that you can use as counterpicks, but it's just not going to be Aftershock tanks specifically. Just to recap, so far we've had the Grasp tanks, which are really good as blind picks and good to dominate the lane phase. We've covered some of the tank counter picks that are really good into any type of tank, and we've had the Aftershock tanks, which you should be picking for your team. The last type of tank is going to be the counter-picking tanks. This is going to be stuff that's going to be taking different runes depending on what you're playing against, and it's going to be champions like Malphite and Poppy. These types of tanks are really strong in the laning phase, but only against certain things. Malphite, for example, has two different rune sets that he can take. Either he takes Grasp if you're playing against an AD attack speed based melee carry, or he takes Comet into ranged champions, but both of these are used as a counter pick. Poppy is also in the same place, where she can take Grasp into harder matchups or Conqueror into much easier matchups like Riven or Fiora or Renekton. Now, any tank can be used as a counter pick, but they have to have something that screws the enemy top laner over. Malphite is good because he has attack speed reduction. Poppy is good because her W stops any sort of mobility from happening. In this way, Cho'Gath can also be used as a counter-picking tank because his silence can mess up a lot of different champions, for example Riven. When you are locking in a tank as a counter pick, your main goal is not to teamfight like it would be with your Aftershock tanks. It's simply to dominate the laning phase and shut one player down. This is a little bit different than the Grasp tanks because Grasp tanks are still going to be good after the laning phase, they're still going to teamfight well, and they're generally really well-rounded champions. But when you're counterpicking, your only goal is to shut one person down. You don't care if you get a lead specifically. Conqueror or Poppy won't scale as well into the late game, but it's going to dominate the lane phase a lot easier. Malphite with Comet, again, not going to scale nearly as well, but you can dominate the lane phase with it. This is why these counter picks are so strong. Now, just because you're going Comet or Conqueror on these champions does not mean that you don't still build full tank. I don't want to see any of you going Triforce Rush on Conqueror Poppy. That was not the point here. The point is, tank metas are becoming more and more popular, so I want you guys to have as many different types of top lane picks for tanks as possible. Tank champions are a lot easier to learn than carry champions in my opinion, so you should be able to pick up multiple different tank champions in the upcoming weeks. If you do intend to play a tank, I highly recommend banning Fiora and Vayne, as these are the two best tank killers in the game. If I had to pick one or two tank champions that you should try out right now, I'd say it would be either Ornn or Sion. Unfortunately, that is just about all the time that we have for today's video on the new tank top lane meta. Remember that the preseason is the best time for improvement, and if you're looking for a learning tool to help you with that, our website is the best out there. Over at our website, we've got hundreds of guides, all done by Challenger players, sorted into a quick and easy to use courses system. We've got courses both on the 5 fundamental roles, as well as champion specific courses. So if that is something that interests you, then make sure to check us out using the link in the description below. As always, I'm Panther, I hope you learned something valuable, and I will see you in the next one.